my name is John Samuel, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Abler, a disability inclusion and accessibility organization. I found my purpose in this work because I am blind. But that wasn't always the fact. As a young person growing up in Cary, North Carolina, the suburb of Raleigh, Durham area, I didn't know I had a disability. When I was playing basketball and missed a pass or missed a shot, I knew I wasn't going to make it to the NBA. And when I was in the classroom and couldn't see things on the board, I thought I just wasn't a great student. But when I went up to college in Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia, I was walking around the urban campus and was busting up my shins and knees all the time. And that's when I was diagnosed with a degenerating eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa, a degenerating eye condition that was making me blind. As a young person, when I heard these words, going blind, it was devastating. What kind of job could I have if I was blind? And where could I live if I couldn't drive? These questions and many more constantly consumed my mind. And my actions led to me failing out of college. So I moved back home to Raleigh, North Carolina, and moved in with my high school buddies who were going to NC State University. But I was ashamed and embarrassed to tell them that I had failed out of college and that I was going blind. So to keep up with impressions, I found a loophole taking classes through a continuing education program. In this program, I could take 2 classes every semester, and this way it looked like I was a student at NC State, even though I really wasn't. But eventually I took so many classes that they had to let me into a full-time program, and I graduated. But I was still driving, and I knew it wasn't safe for me or others on the road. So I knew I had to get out of North Carolina, and I decided to move to Bangalore, India. In Bangalore, I knew I could get a car and drive it pretty easily, so that felt like the right move for me. But after a couple of years there, I realized it just wasn't, and I wanted to come back home to the US. So I moved to New York City. At the time, I was working for the city of New York, providing financial education for city employees. But when I was looking at my friends around me, they were going to grad school, they were moving up in their investment banks or law firms, and I didn't see the same type of career trajectory for myself. And that's when I reconnected with a gentleman named Steve Clemens, who I had worked with in India. Steve was now on the board of directors of a cell phone tower manufacturing company, and they wanted to start up operations in Cameroon. And when I heard about this, I jumped at it. I said, send me out there, I can do that. And Steve knew I had some sort of eye condition, but didn't know the extent of my vision loss. But he was willing to take a chance on me. But when the investors of the organization found out that I couldn't see, they said, no way. And I pleaded with them. I said, please, give me a chance. I can do this. And they said, okay, we'll give you 6 months and I'll go our separate ways. I said, perfect. So I packed up my bags and took a $20,000 investment and left Manhattan to move to Douala, Cameroon to start this new business. In the next 14 months, I had built a team around me, and we had generated $12 million in revenue, $2.4 million in profit. And over the next 2 years, we had expanded that company across the continent, having operations in 8 countries, sales in 22. I felt like I had finally succeeded in the business world. And I felt like it was time for me to go back to business school, just like my friends in New York. So I moved to DC to go to George Washington University. And as I was looking for jobs after business school, I struggled to land a job. Phone interviews went great, but when they met me in person, I wasn't what they were expecting. I eventually landed on my feet with a fintech startup that was raising capital for businesses in emerging markets. After 3 years, that company folded, and I was out of a job again. I now had a wife, a baby, and we had just built a house in the DC market. And those things aren't cheap when you don't have a job. It's not cheap anytime. But now, the stress of it all caused my sight to go even faster, and I could no longer see the computer screen. But that's when I heard about this software that was developed at a company called SAS, a data science company. They had designed this software to help people who are blind and low vision visualize graphs and charts using sounds. I thought it was so cool. But the coolest thing about it, it was designed by a gentleman named Ed Summers, who had the same eye condition as me and lived in my hometown of Cary, North Carolina. When I met Ed, he introduced me to the world of accessibility, and he showed me that my career wasn't over. But he gave me a couple pieces of advice. He said, you're going to have to be open about your disability, and you're going to have to learn as someone who's blind. And so I started to learn the assistive technologies of a screen reader that people who are blind use to navigate technology. And I started reaching out to companies who had diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, but nobody got back to me. And when I realized that I was struggling to find a job with my education, my experience, and my privilege, I started thinking about, what about other blind people? And I wanted to start a new business that would make sunglasses, but I wanted to have them made by people who are blind. I thought that if I can give someone a job, I can give them hope in this life and generational impact. And that's when Ed decided to introduce me to someone. He introduced me to an organization called LCI, the largest employer of people who are blind in the country, and they were located just 7 miles from where I grew up in North Carolina. But when I met the president, he talked about wanting to create upward mobility for people who are blind in tech and wanted to start a new business. So I agreed to come down and start that business for them, which ultimately became Abler. At Abler, we have 3 lines of business, and it's all based on my own lived experiences and the challenges I faced. The first thing we do is we eliminate the digital divide, which we do through our digital accessibility services. What I realized is that when I was applying for jobs, sometimes I couldn't even do it because the applications just weren't accessible. I struggled with my education because content wasn't accessible. So we knew we have to address the accessibility barriers. The next thing we had to do was change the mindsets of people in organizations. That meant we had to change the mindsets of interviewers, managers, in organizations from top to bottom. So we created a disability inclusion training. Finally, we had to create pathways for employment. So we launched a workforce development program to train individuals to pursue careers in tech-related fields. These 3 lines of business are how we are serving the disability community and creating opportunities in tech. But as I wrap up, I challenge all of you to think what inclusive design means to you and how you can be more accessible. Because if you do this, we can make tech more inclusive for all people. Thank you so much.